Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hey everybody. So what if I told you that the elevator you're waiting for isn't going to the office? It's going straight to financial freedom. And what if the person holding the elevator door for you used to be just like you, a hardworking engineer trapped in a corporate hamster wheel? Well, welcome to Authors on Mission podcast. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer here at Authors on Mission. Today, we're stepping into the wealth elevator with Lane Kawaoka, a former engineer who went from eating ramen noodles to controlling over $2.1 billion in real estate. But he's not just here to sell you his wonderful ideas. He's here to hand you the keys to an elevator that most people never even know exists. The latest book he has is The Wealth Elevator, where he tells you why your 401k might be a trap, how you can legally pay zero taxes, and why the biggest risk isn't losing money, it's following everybody else's playbook. So forget everything you think, let's take a ride up the elevator and also learn all about some writing strategies here on today's podcast too. So without further ado, Lane, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Aloha, everybody.
Hello. It's great to meet you. Some really cool stuff here, and I'm looking forward to learning some of these secret and awesome tips. But before we do, I would love to get to know you a little bit more. I'm wondering if you can share a brief rundown of how you went from being a ramen eating cheapo, as you say, to where you are now. How did this all get started?
Yeah, I kind of call this the linear path of, I'm kind of one of these folks that were taught to go to school, study hard, eventually got an engineering degree and started to work for the man, and a pretty decent job, right? I mean, no complaints there. But, we're also taught to buy a house to live in, invest in 401ks and stuff like that, and go down this normal financial path. But very early on, I was brainwashed to do all that and buy a house to live in. But an interesting thing happened to me very early on. I was working on the road for work all the time, and I was only home on the weekends. So I bought a first house to live in my early 20s. And it was kind of, silly to have this big house to myself. I didn't have a family back then. And it just kind of on a whim just started to rent it out. But then that was kind of where I got this taste of cash flow. And at first it was a lot of good beer money, right? The rents were $2,200 a month. The mortgage was $1,600, and it was good times. But then I quickly realized, like, wow, if I kept doing this a few more times, I'll be able to quit the rat race and fire my boss. And that was kind of the start of things back in 2009.
That's really incredible that you kind of went from that typical, the standard path to breaking free of that and literally making your own elevator, which is, what the book's whole metaphor is all about. Really cool stuff. And I'll be honest, that's kind of my dream too. One day I'm, currently doing all this with publishing and editing, but as we progress, my boyfriend and I do have plans to kind of follow in that same footstep. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of your tips and all that. I think it's an incredible way. Why own a house, right, when you could just use that property to leverage it and earn more and better yourself? I love that you went ahead and made it happen.
Yeah. And we can kind of talk about this more in depth today. There's a lot of financial advice out there, some good, some horrible. And it really depends on where you are in the journey too, right? Like certain advice is better for example, buying a house to live in. I think that's good for most people because most people aren't really good with managing their finances. But if you're good with your money and you're a good saver, you should be able to invest it, whether it's the stock market or rental properties. I'm not a huge fan of crypto, but you take that money, invest it, you could probably make a higher return than just owning your little old house.
Yeah. And, you've done this and helped so many people, over 15,000 different investors. So I'm sure you see a lot of patterns, and where people are at and what benefits them the most. I'm wondering, do you happen to see something particular in those who succeed in this versus those who struggle? How do you know you're ready for it?
I think the big thing here is a lot of it is math driven. The numbers don't lie. There's a lot of just financial advice, kind of like my parents told me a lot of this stuff, right? But it's not necessarily right, like I said earlier. So I think the big thing here is like, let's just come in with this with a blank slate and really question why, right? And run the numbers. And I think, when people do that, they start to realize that there's a lot of things that the average Joe does with their money that just doesn't really make too much sense. But that's what everybody else does. That's what everybody in corporate America, the cubicle land does. And it's hard to break free from that. Which is why I think, when people get into our group, right, we have a community of other like-minded, more higher net worth investors, because it's hard, right? And when I was an engineer, being around other people, thinking, invest in the 401k, get this company match, whoop-de-doo, it's just, it's just kind of leading you down this path of everybody else is going down.
Yeah, exactly. And you just have to figure out what's right for you and how you could best leverage the situation to better yourself based on what your goals might be and, what's going to work. So I can see how you have adapted that way. Now I'm kind of curious, which came first, kind of a, chicken or the egg type question, your book or the whole advisory team you have?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually the podcast back in
Really?
2016. Okay. Fast forward 2015, I had 11 rental properties and now starting to buy apartments at that point. And just kind of on a whim, just started to podcast and talk about it, right? At that time, I was teaching people how to buy little rental properties remotely. Here I was buying, I was living in Seattle, now I live in Hawaii, but we would buy properties remotely because that's just where the better cash flow is. Especially when, most of us live in nicer areas, right? That not necessarily good places to invest for rental property stock. So that's how I started that the traction in terms of building a brand, building community. That went on for maybe a few years. And then that kind of gave me confidence that people, it's useful. And to get these emails back saying like, hey, thanks. I did what you said you were going to do. You didn't make it seem so difficult, and I'm like, gee, thanks. And at that point I was like, wow, maybe I should, instead of just like, podcasts are like all over the place, right? There's just like a lot of content in there. And like, let me just formulate this into a system. And that was kind of where the book writing came from.
Yeah, awesome. So you pretty much found a need that had to be filled. And based on all this feedback that you were getting, positive feedback, you figured, why not write a book about it? It'll make my life easier rather than responding to all these people. I can direct them to the book instead, right? Answering all their questions. I'm assuming that's kind of how it came about as well.
Right. I mean, I always loved the podcast format, maybe because I was a ramen noodle eating cheapo and I like free stuff, right? But I think most people, when they get to a certain point, like podcasts are essentially marketing tools for a lot of folks out there. And it's just the same stuff over and over again. And the saying is like, you get what you pay for, where a book is something that the author really puts a lot of effort into. I mean, you go through it most times 3 times at the very least, where the podcast format is very forgiving. You can just get on there and ramble if you're kind of like that, if you have that gift, but it's not going to be very, it's not going to be formulated. It's a heck of a lot less formulated than a YouTube video. And that's where, as somebody who's kind of got the baseline level of information, I think podcasts are a great way to get free content out there, but you get to a point where you've probably heard it all and you need to dig a little bit deeper. I think that's what's so cool about the book format, right?
I really like that you compared podcasting to book writing, because you have a good point there. Podcasting, I can say as many times as I need, hopefully not, right? But if you make that mistake, if you cough or whatever, no big deal. It could be edited out or it sounds more natural to listeners. Whereas if you're reading a book, you don't want any of that stuff. It has to be very direct, very clear, engaging, because somebody can easily just close the book. Whereas if you're listening to a podcast, you're more inclined to just keep it on for a little bit longer, probably. You're interested in what they're saying. So I can see how there's a difference, and it takes a lot more planning to, get your words on the page. Did you experience any specific struggles when you were transitioning from the live podcasting to the book world?
Yeah, I mean, I've been podcasting since 2016, and when the book came around, like there was a lot of stuff I quite frankly forgot about it. But I guess maybe we back up a little bit. Even before that, before the book, I had an e-course, right? And people come to my website, you can get it for free. I mean, it's free content we put out there in a member site. But for me, the order was, well, first coach people one-on-one. And this sounds horrible because it's like you're almost messing it up and learning with people. Because if you're the expert, you don't know the questions people are asking, because I was like, back then, it's like, well, how do we go and do due diligence on apartments or buying a rental property remotely? It's like, well, duh. I mean, at this point, I'm a natural, right? I'm an expert. So actually, I'm kind of a horrible person to write this book, right? So by working with people one-on-one, I kind of learned what are the sticking points, what are the modules that I need to create. And from there, I created e-courses, and that created the modules. And from there was a seamless transition to writing the book at that point.
It's really interesting that you said that. As a ghostwriter and an editor, I work all the time with people who want to write a book about their frameworks, their brand, whatever it might be. And that's kind of one of the first steps you have to take. It's figuring out, what do we need to answer? What are audiences going to have a question about? And just in general, who is your audience, right? You're not just putting a book out there for everybody. You're putting it out there for that person that you're hoping to draw in and assist. So like all goes into it. I'm sure you did a lot of research as well, making sure that everything that had to be answered was in there. Everything was sound. What was that research process like? Or was it mainly based on your experiences from this consulting?
Yeah, I think that like all the content was there, right? I had a lot of that, but I think to your earlier point, like to have empathy on who exactly the person is out there. Like I specifically work with more accredited investors, people who make over $100,000-$200,000 a year, not quite the house flipper kind of group, professional folks, kind of like myself, right? I had a professional white collar job. And to always have that person in mind, right? Like, how much does this person make? They're typically in their 40s and 50s, a little bit older, right? They're not on TikTok. They're not on all these other Snapchat, whatever. But it was really getting in that person's head and writing this book specifically for them. And there's kind of a saying out there, if you're speaking or writing to everybody, you're talking to nobody, right? You're not being specific enough.
Exactly. And that's one of like the main pieces of advice I'm always writing about in my blogs and talking to people on these podcasts about. You need to make sure you know who you're speaking to. And that's what it's all about. And speaking of which, this podcast is targeted to, writers and readers, people who are looking to expand their knowledge in that regard. So I'm wondering, what was the process like for yourself? Your book is very detailed, very technical. I'm sure you had to find a good balance between providing strategies while keeping it accessible and also keeping it engaging. Do you have any tips in that regard about your writing process?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, this is like my third book in reality, but at this point, I kind of got the flow of it. I mean, I think it's different for everybody, so can't say this is for everybody, but I think the first step, at least for myself, is figuring out what is that topic, who am I trying to target, and then what is it they want to know, and then that kind of goes into the outline. What are the individual chapters, but also like the breakout sections. Because in each chapter you may have half a dozen to over a dozen sections that might be, I don't know, 200, 300 words each that you're going to go into more detailed. And that was a very seamless transition for me coming from podcast world and blogs, because you naturally write in these 200 to 500 word segments, which is exactly what a book section is. So, but the hard thing about writing a book is you need to string it all together, and then you need to interlace the real life stories, like when I lost money, or when I was doing, going into the wealth elevator from floor 1 to floor 2, going from a non-accredited investor buying rental properties to investing passively in bigger deals, and then now all the tax strategies, how weird it was for me at that time. A lot of this was just going back and following the footsteps that I've kind of followed, and that was had to recreate that when I wrote the book, and that was the outline kind of came about that way.
Yeah, and one thing that stuck with me, what you said, is the idea that you have to put in your own stories, and not just your successes, but your failures too. And it sounds like you definitely did that. It's important that you address what roadblocks you came across, not only to show people how to solve them, but also to humble yourself a bit and say, hey, I got here, but it wasn't easy. You can too. It kind of adds relatability to the audience. I can see that you put that in your book as well.
Yeah, I mean, depends if you can do it, right? Like, I mean, if you have no experience, then don't play around with that stuff. Just fake it till you make it, I suppose. But I mean, a lot of people in the real estate world are just these fake gurus that have never done anything. So, it's when we went into it, we were like, yeah, we can blow these people out of the water. I've got stories for days of like real life stuff that we've been through. With well over, I don't know, 10,000 units at this point, being the landlord on. So it was really about like now exploiting that huge advantage. And I'm sure everybody's heard like Storyboard. I don't know who the guy who's made it, but they're big website makers. And I mean, and then the other thing is like, I think there's like an acronym EAT, like basically it's experience and stories and stuff like that, right? Like, you can't just talk about stuff. You need to like explain it with stories and the thing behind it. I know I'm in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and when we talk about things, it's always experience sharing. Like, what is it that we actually did and the situation, and we don't give advice. It's always coming from this experience as opposed to, oh, I heard this on a podcast and you should try this. Like it just doesn't come across very well, and it certainly doesn't come across well in a book.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to make sure you even just have things to back up what you're saying too, in terms of the stories, but also the numbers. I was looking through your book and you have a lot of specific dollar amounts, tax strategies. So I'm wondering, how did you even decide, what to keep private versus what to share? I'm wondering if you had any, not shyness, but if you were hesitant to put anything out there, or was it mainly just, hey, everybody, I'm an open book. Here's what I know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been like desensitized to that since I've been podcasting since 2016. Essentially walking around naked, financially naked for the last almost decade. So that was no problem to me at the time. I mean, it certainly have to be careful because when you put yourself out there, especially money wise, especially for like a lot of my clients, their net worth is $1 million or greater. And we talk about when you cross that threshold, now you're a real target to being sued. When you're broke, got no money, no one really wants to sue you because there's really nothing to get there. But when you cross over this $1 million threshold, you're definitely got a target on your back. But I don't know. I mean, it's probably stupid that I do what I do, but it may get me at the end of the day. But I think that's like, people don't talk about this type of stuff, right? It's very taboo subjects about money and being the beneficiary of great wealth. Right? Like, not a lot of people talk about it. But that's essentially what attracts great people to our community. We can professionally talk about it. We're not showboating. We're not showing off. But it's like, well, we're trying to raise a family. We're trying to raise kids when you have money. Like, it's just a little bit different. And I guess I've always kind of thought that, you could take the approach where you're trying to be careful on what you say and be secretive, but I think that doesn't help too much people unless you just air it all out and just put it out there, and whatever happens. We only live one life. And that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we have one life to live. You might as well get it out there because it's going to help people. For one, we just talked about how important it is to share those stories. So it's good to be just, open and authentic. But one thing you did mention is, how it's not very conventional. I don't think that you're actually being stupid by putting it all out there. I think it's very great, but it does kind of challenge a lot of conventional financial wisdom. I mean, everyone growing up always told me to invest in that 401k. So did you happen to have any pushback from traditional financial advisors or anybody saying like, you're wrong, like this isn't correct? I mean, the numbers don't lie, you're correct, but I'm wondering if anybody did.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have like alternative viewpoint. I guess very similarly to like, healthcare, naturopaths would maybe face the same thing. Financial planners don't like me. They certainly don't want me to talk to their people, right, or come on their podcasts. But I think it is what it is. I speak the truth, right? In fact, the numbers back this stuff up, right? Go and buy your own rental properties on the first floor of the wealth elevator and see where you get. Pay a lot less taxes and you get much further ahead. But I think that's I know very well that a lot of people don't like to hear this type of stuff, especially if the financial planners, because they're the guys who get rich off people just kind of following the beaten path blindly.
Right, right. And, I think that one thing that all authors need to be aware of, especially nonfiction writers, is to have the alternating viewpoint in your brain as you're writing, because you're going to need to expect that critique and be ready to address it within your book.
Right. I mean, if you're not going off a new idea that's somewhat controversial, then what's the point, right? What's the point?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're not just going to keep saying the same thing everybody else is saying. I get that. Yeah, something new. That's why people are reading a book in the first place, to learn that new thing.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was like there's somewhat of like a pain and passion behind it, because it's like there's so many hardworking people out there. I mean, not saying that if you swing a hammer or you do blue collar work that it's not hard work, but I'm speaking specifically to my avatar, which is like people who went to decade plus of school and grad school, and now you're going like 50, 100 grand a year for college, right? It's all a bunch of BS if you just are stuck in this like job where you get paid a little bit more, and then you got to put your money into this thing where everybody's taking your money at the end of the day in hidden fees. And that's essentially like my parents, right? Like they still don't know that they got screwed, but they always just blindly put their money in their 401k, and because they were such great savers, they ended up with $1 million. But $1 million is nothing these days in reality.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's so important that we do prepare for this. What used to be a lot back then is not now. I think anybody listening to today's podcast can agree with that. In order just to survive in today's day and age, especially with all the changes going on in the United States, so on and so forth, we need to prepare ourselves. So what you are offering to people is not only advice, just try out, but something we should, implement and really hold on to, because we don't know what's going to be happening in the future. We have to be
Although
ready.
I'm not allowed to give financial advice since I'm a certified financial planner. If I was, I'd have to charge people
Got it.
percent AUM fee. But these are just, I think that's the thing, is like, look, try it out for yourself. I think the interesting thing is, like, very quietly, once you start to get on the beaten path or off the beaten path of buying little rental properties and direct investments into real estate, other private equity, you start to realize there's a lot more people that do this secretively and quietly. And it's just a very different mindset than, paying a lot in taxes and, the traditional investments that you get killed with taxes there.
Right, definitely. So, as we continue on with the podcast and begin to wrap up, I'm wondering if we can transition a little bit more into the writing process. I'm wondering if you happen to have any other tips for the audience today in regards to that. I mean, we spoke a little bit about, your target audience. We spoke about, keeping personal advice versus practical advice. Anything else that perhaps you might want to offer to the audience?
I'm big on using AI, and I'm not a good typer, right? Like to sit down on a piece of paper and write it. Like I don't do any of that. I mean, I don't understand how anybody does that, because I certainly can't. I just sort of ramble, and I just have the AI put it into English, and then comes the next process of turning it and molding that piece after that.
Understood.
And I'm an engineer, right? That's why I did engineering. I'm horrible at writing. So, but I can come up with ideas, and that's the hard part. So certainly, like the editors and the people behind the scenes put the clay pieces and put it all together. But I think that's the hardest part, is like the original ideal creation.
Yeah. I mean, first off, AI is a huge topic these days. Is it good for writing? Is it not? And, at the end of the day, it does take away the human element to it. One thing I actually do for my, editing and writing work, humanization is a huge thing for that now. People give me their AI written manuscripts all the time, and my job is to make it sound human, right? So it's kind of doing what you did, but then adding on another layer of it. I can see exactly why you did what you did, right? There's no reason for you to spend your time writing a book, because your main goal is just to get the information across. You're an engineer after all. But yeah, I mean, if just for anybody listening today, if you want to go that route, I definitely recommend having somebody add a little bit more humanization into that. or even just working with a ghostwriter, an angel writer, maybe even could also help too. Not to say that, your strategy definitely worked, which is good, and it's good to leverage it to how you need, but always a word of caution out there to make sure it's all safe. I'm sure you did a lot of
Yeah, I mean, make the mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't hit Amazon 4.6 stars or better by having an AI generated book, right? And I think that's the thing. Like everybody's saying, like, oh, the world of writing books is going to be over with AI. It's like, no, it's pretty clear that if you have an AI generated book, it's going to be horrible, absolutely horrible. And the people who read books are going to be so upset that they are absolutely going to flame on your book in terms of ratings. So I think one thing is made it even more important to have a human come through and put in the stories, the human elements. But the initial heavy lifting can be done via AI for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So no, it's always good to make use of those tools too. It's here for us, even if it is to help you, just do some research or write a whole chapter or paragraph. If you're leveraging it to the right way and for your own needs, it's absolutely something to keep in mind. And
yeah, I'll give one more tip too. I mean, yeah, the way I write too, it's a lot of it is like prompt, or like because I come from podcast world, right? Like I have to oftentimes ask myself a question. So it's kind of weird. Like I ask myself a question to then answer it to myself, right? But if like sometimes I'll write a chapter out and then like I think this is a good use case for AI. It's like feed the chapter in there and say like, all right, well, empathetically, what is the person on the other end might be thinking or interpret this? Or what else thing might I add? I think that's a great use case for AI. Right? Like, and then it asks me, oh, here are 2 or 3 questions you haven't thought about. It's like, awesome. I like this one. All right. Click record. Here I go. Boom. And here comes another 500 words, original 500 words, right? Like, I think that's a great use case for AI to help fill in pieces like that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great tip. And I think as AI becomes more and more prominent, tips just like that are what people are going to need. So perhaps that's another book coming up, is how to leverage it for things like this. That's just one good thing. So I mean, that being said, you've definitely offered a lot of great insights to our audience today regarding, finances and also the writing industry. I'm wondering if anybody's interested in getting in touch with you, perhaps, learning a little bit more, where should they head to connect?
They can shoot me email, lane@thewealthelevator.com. If you guys are interested in reading a book, or I also did the audiobook. I may get the podcast studio all set up. That was a pain, I'll tell you that, because I did it all in one day just to have the audio all the right place. But I think a lot of people, they don't read books, or at least I don't, but I listen to them. But if anybody wants the MP3 or the audio or the PDF, reach out, lane@thewealthelevator.com.
All right, well, perfect. We're going to put the links to that in the description box of this podcast today. So if you're listening, go ahead and click over, find out more about Lane. He has some really eye-opening tips for us. And before we go, I have to ask, if you're listening to this in your car right now, maybe stuck in traffic, heading to a job you don't love, what would you want them to do when they get home tonight? One piece of homework for them.
I would say subscribe to my podcast, The Wealth Elevator.
Of course.
But go to check out my book, right? Because I think that's the one-stop shop place. In going through 400 plus past episodes, I've always kind of wanted to make it as easy or as quick as possible. And I would say the first tip is figure out what floor of the wealth elevator you're at. Maybe you're already an accredited investor, right? The strategies change based on where you're at. And as opposed to, taking up financial tips left and right that may not apply to you where you're at now, figure out where you are now and then have a plan moving forward from there. But the first thing I think is awareness and where you're at, right? What floor you're on.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of what you said in the beginning, be mindful of where you are and what works best for you. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And to our listeners, remember, the elevator is waiting. The doors are open. You have the blueprint. You can learn more by connecting with Lane. He's literally handed you the system that took him from corporate cubicle to financial freedom. So also remember, at Authors on Mission, our podcast exists to give you the strategies successful people actually use, not the ones they tell everyone else to use. Lane's story should have resonated with you, so grab that book and, more importantly, take that first step. I'm Danielle Hutchinson. This has been Authors on Mission, and until next time, just remember, your mission isn't just to read about success, it's to write your own story of it. So keep reading, keep writing, keep leading, keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on Authors on Mission.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.